Good afternoon. We're excited to have you join us today. I'm Julie Woodward with the Oregon Forest Resources Institute, and it's my pleasure to be your host today for the Tree School Online webinar. Tree School Online is a production of the OSU Forestry and Natural Resources Extension Program and the Partnership for Forestry Education. We want to give special recognition to OFRI for leading this project and to the Forest Service and the Oregon Department of Forestry for giving us a grant to help cover the expenses. True School Online are scheduled every Tuesday between now and until July 28th. Hopefully you caught the one this morning. They happen at 10 a.m. and then this one at 3 o'clock p.m. A couple housekeeping details, just in case this is your first one you've joined. Probably many of you are very familiar with Zoom by now, but you should have a Zoom toolbar. It's usually located at the bottom of the screen. It's helpful as we move along if you might want to do some of those features. On some of the iPads, it may be more on the top of the display. That's where if you might find if you want to look at who's participating today and join in some of the polls. You won't have any audio as the audience today or video. That'll just be held for the host and the presenters. But you can look at the participant list and see who's with us today. You also, really important down there in that toolbar, have a Q&A, and that's where you're welcome to ask any questions about the secret life of birds and what Marilyn might present today in that Q&A box. And we'll try and answer those throughout and at the end of the presentation. The other button you'll find down there is the chat, and you actually can see it started on the side. That's a great place if you have any technical problems or anything that's not a Q&A for our presenter. And thanks to Mike Clousey today, is going to be our co-host, and we'll be watching there to answer any questions you might have as we go along on things related to the webinar or if you're having any issues. Again, please don't post your questions in the chat, but put those in the Q&A. Today, Marilyn has some resources that are available. And if you went to the same place where you registered, the Tree School Online Class Guide, you'll also find those links to the to all the webinar descriptions. And at the webinar descriptions, you'll find the instructor resources. Today's webinar is being recorded. They'll be archived on YouTube and be accessible from the Tree School Online page. We also want to express that the views and opinions expressed today by our speakers are of those and theirs alone, and not of the sponsors of OSU, OFRI, or the Partnership for Forestry Education. Marilyn and the host today are also going to ask you some polls and at the beginning and at the end, just to help you learn a little bit more about who you are and help us answer a few questions. And so those will pop up and be available. And then I'd like to take the time to introduce our presenter today is Marilyn Ellis. And Marilyn is a wildlife educator with more than 25 years of experience as a licensed wildlife rehabilitator. She has training from the International Wildlife Rehabilitation Council, including training in dangerous animal handling and wound management. And Marilyn, I thought it's been fun to learn, spent her summers with her grandparents on a 2,000-acre ranch in California, and credits her grandmother, who was an amateur naturalist, on helping her find this passion that she has for wildlife. So we're excited that Marilyn can join us today. And Marilyn, thank you for taking the time to come share more about your passion.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my favorite thing in the whole world to do is to talk about birds. So thank you very much.
It shows. Marilyn,
So are we ready?
We
Are we
are
ready to
ready.
go?
If you'd like to
Okay.
advance your slides, and
All
we'll
right.
talk a little bit about what you're going to do today.
So we're going to talk about the secret life of birds, and that means we're going to really talk about birds that you might find on your property and in your own backyard, primarily songbirds, but we are going to talk about some raptors and some owls as well. This picture is from Butchart Gardens in Vancouver, BC, and I think we'd all agree that it would be a really fun thing, although a little big, to put in our gardens, but I just saw this picture and I had to have it for my presentation. So I really look forward to sharing some really interesting facts about birds that are going to help with your knowledge and appreciation. And I know that now you want to go to poll time, so here we go. And I'll wait until we're ready to go again.
Great. Thanks, Marilyn. I'm looking forward to hearing about that today, and what a fun picture. So, for the audience today, even though we can't hear from you, we'd like to get your input. And our first poll, we'd like to ask 3 questions. Where are you from? So, what area you're from here today, or you'd like to identify with in the Willamette Valley or coast or southwest, central, or eastern, or maybe coming from outside the US? The second one is ask yourself about yourself. Are you a woodland owner, private natural resource professional, agency, or other? And then the last one's how many acres of forest land do you own or manage, and kind of some areas there. So if you'll just take a moment and click which ones that you feel that you are best fit your description. So we appreciate getting this information from our all of the participants. Just it helps us know where you're at today and a little bit more about you. Marilyn, where are you coming from today?
I am in Tualatin in
Oh,
Washington
nice.
County.
So you'd be in that Willamette Valley
I'm
category, as would
I'm
I.
Willamette Valley. I'm Willamette Valley, yes, which is a really large part of Oregon. It's kind of hard not to be unless you're in the Cascades. You're in the
That's
Willamette.
true. As it looks like most of our guests today, most of the participants looks like the majority are also from the Willamette Valley area. Not too many from the coast, just a few, Southwest Oregon, Central or Eastern Oregon. And then we have our neighboring to the state, Washington, and then a few also from other places in the US, and
Wow,
only about 2% outside the US. So you have them across the board today.
that's exciting.
It looks like the majority of our um, participants are also from a woodland owner. It's about 64% own woodlands. And then we have also across the board of natural resource professionals and many in the other category. So I'm guessing those might be some bird lovers that have come in and joined us today. And then how many acres of forest land do you own or manage? Those are also, again, across the board, many people either don't own forest land, or they're just, again, joining us for the fun information. And then we see the acres across the board from about 29% are 10 acres or less, 21% are 10 acres to 40, and then we have a few that are even over 1,000 acres. So again, people coming to you with a variety of management experience and backgrounds, and across the state and even outside the US. So thanks everybody um, for sharing those results, and we appreciate everyone taking the time to contribute those. And with that, Marilyn, I will hand over back to you, and we will
Okay.
take Q&A, and I'll work with you at the end to share those questions with you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Well, here we go. So these are my goals today. Is first of all, my message to you is you can be a bird watcher without knowing the species by name. It's a wonderful thing if you can do that. It's wonderful if you can recognize their call. But some people think, oh, well, I'm really not a birder, and it's too much work, and I can't really do this, and so I'm not going to bother. And my message to you is that you can do this, because I'm going to teach you how to notice birds and understand them as you've never done before. And it has nothing to do with what they look like or even how they sound, although I have some interesting stories about that. This is information about birds in general and their behavior, how to read their behavior, how to know what kind of drama, life and death and courtship and love and all sorts of things are going on in their world. And you're walking by it and you're not noticing it. And this is when you're going to learn how to notice that. So you can be a birder by just understanding their behavior, and you can apply this information to any bird you see anywhere in the world. These are universal concepts. So that's my goal for you today, is that you will feel very comfortable and be able to say, yes, you're a bird watcher, and have some interesting stories to share with others as well, I hope. So let's start right at the basics. What exactly is a bird? What makes them unlike any other creature on this earth? How can they fly such great distances? What do their songs and calls mean? How can they build nests without hands and tools? What makes a bluebird blue? Why do hummingbirds sparkle? And other secrets revealed. You'll have the answer to all those questions by the end. So a bird is any class of warm-blooded, two-legged, egg-laying vertebrate with feathers. So that means that a vertebrate means it has a backbone, it's warm-blooded like we are, and it also has feathers. And feathers is really the defining moment for a bird, is the fact that they have feathers. Nothing else has feathers. Now, I believe that we have always recognized that birds are rather celestial. There's something extraordinary and special about them. And if you look through the history of our cultures, you'll see that we have put wings on our angels and on our sort of celestial beings. And we have always, always done that. And I think it's because we have an intuitive understanding that they are something very special. And as a matter of fact, they're the only dinosaurs that that actually survived the great big explosion that killed off all the other dinosaurs on Earth. Birds were the only ones that made it through. So I think the universe feels the same way about them. They're pretty special. So we're going to do some bird biology and behavior, because I know that there are things about birds you think you understand that you may not. You're making assumptions based on what you're seeing. And so I want to sort of give you some insight into how they sort of work and how their bodies are arranged, because it's pretty amazing. So first of all, they have 5 fingers just like us, but 2 are fused together, and it's kind of the Vulcan sort of thing. So it's kind of like this. So they have two of their fingers are together, and then they have their thumb, which they call the alula, and that is actually kind of on its own, and that allows them to turn their wings when they fly. So I hope that you can see that, because I don't have an image of me to tell, but I'm told that if I put it in front of my nose, you'll be able to see that. So this is what their wing structure actually looks like. And their thumb, that alula, is really an important part of what they do. And you can see it, it's right here. There's the alula right there on their wings. What you think is the shoulder right here is actually the wrist, because we all often get this when we get the birds into the wildlife hospital at Audubon, Portland. They come in and people say, oh, it's hurt its shoulder. It hasn't hurt its shoulder. It's actually hurt its wrist, because in birds, and again, because you can't see me, I'm hoping I can kind of show you. So their wings really fold down like this. So what you're seeing up at the top is actually the wrist folding down, and it goes out like that. So this is the wrist of the bird, not the shoulder at all. The shoulder is way back in there behind that wing. What you think of as a backward knee, and that's just what it looks like, doesn't it? It looks like a backward knee, is actually the heel. Birds have really big feet, and they just walk on their toes. So the knee is really up in here. There's a whole nother, this is the leg here, the lower part of the leg. This is the heel of the foot. This is all foot, all of it. And then the knee is in here. So this is actually the heel of the bird's foot. They walk on their toes. And it's kind of fun when you're looking at birds in your garden. A robin is a perfect example. Robins walk because they're pretty heavy. Little birds like sparrows and even actually thrushes will hop back and forth. Hopping back and forth for a small bird is easy because they're lightweight and it's not a big deal. But for a bigger bird, it's a hassle and it uses up too much energy. And energy means calories. Calorie means strength and health. And if they use it up and they're too weak to hunt or look for food, they're going to starve to death. So birds are all about conservation of energy. And one of the ways they do that is the larger they get, the more they're going to walk rather than hop. And the reason that they have their feet like this is kind of the reason that if you think about the way you jump, when you're getting ready to jump, what's the first thing you do? You get up on your toes and you hop. Now, if we were in person, I'd be doing a little dance for you on in the classroom. But basically, what you instinctively do is you get up on your toes before you jump. And birds do the same thing. That jump on their toes, they're always ready for escape, because when they jump, they're adding lift under their wings by coming up and then coming down, creates a wind draft underneath their wings and allows them to escape a predator. So they're always ready for escape, always ready for escape. They're always on their toes. So when we say, you really got to be on your toes about this, we're not kidding. They're always on their toes and ready, because they never know when something's going to come and try and eat them. Their world is all about survival, and this is what they're doing. Just a little example, something I hadn't mentioned in a class before, is this bird has eyes on the side of its head. And it's looking out sideways. Ducks also do that. Ducks go this way. They can look this way and they can look this way, and they have quite a good vision. That's that side eyes is prey. Any animal with eyes on its side of its head, like ducks or like rabbits, for instance, they're a prey species. If you're a hunter, you're like us. You have eyes in the front of your head. So notice when you see birds where their eyes are positioned. Birds of prey, for instance, always have their eyes in the front because they're hunters and they're looking for that prey, and and so are we. So we are hunters. So if you were to land anywhere, even on another planet, I think the rules would probably apply that if your eyes are in the front of the head, whatever that animal or that alien that's coming at you is going to be either a predator or a prey, and you'll know by the position of their eyes. So that's another little thing to mention. Their bone structure is really, really strong, and we have used this in biomimicry to build our bridges and also wings on airplanes, because they have structure and strength without weight. And in between these bones are pneumatic, air-filled cells that allow for extra air, extra oxygen that they carry in their bodies like little fuel tanks. But at the same time, we have the strength without the weight. And weight is one of the components when you're talking about flight. You have to have certain amount of lift in order to compensate for the weight of the body. Something the Wright brothers figured out, that when they first built their first planes, they were like solid wood, and they didn't realize that one of the reasons that birds can fly is because their structure is really skeletonized like this. And this is a bird bone, but look at what we've done and how we have copied that. And that is exactly why. These air sacs are fuel for the body. Oxygen is the fuel of the muscle, and they need that for migrating and also for bursts of flight in order to escape a predator. They have 5 air sacs in addition to their lungs. And then remember, they have these pneumatic tubes that are in their bones. If you've ever eaten a cooked chicken bone and you find that little tube inside, the reason we don't give chicken bones to dogs, for instance, is because they'll splinter into little pieces, because they're hollow. And they're hollow for a reason. They're actually fuel tanks. Aside from being lightweight but strong, they're also fuel tanks. And they also have these 5 air sacs in their body. If you were to look at them in a necropsy, which is the animal version of an autopsy, these beautiful air sacs look like iridescent bubbles, like soap bubbles. They're just absolutely beautiful. And often when a bird comes into the hospital, wildlife hospital, often cat caught, the people will say, oh, well, there's no blood, it seems fine, but it just can't fly. Well, that cat has punctured one of these air sacs, which often causes the air to actually seep out underneath the skin and cause this huge balloon. Most of the time we see it under the bird's wing. It can kill the bird, it can cause infection. Sometimes we can puncture that little bubble with a sterile needle and hope that and give it antibiotics and hope that it survives. But it needs those 5 air sacs. And actually with the air sacs, it's 2 lungs, and the air in between the bones, it has 7 times more capacity than a mammal of the same size. They don't get this burn that we get, this stitch in our side, because all of this oxygen is fueling their muscles, and they need that for a quick burst of energy for escape, or for a very long migration where some of them fly hundreds of miles before they stop and rest. And that's pretty astonishing when you think about it. So they go with their own supply of oxygen tanks on board. They have something that's very interesting. They have their own built-in aviator goggles, and it is called the nictitating membrane. It starts on the inside of the eye and goes this way. So it starts here and it closes on that side. It's really a reflex reaction. If you spray them with water, this is an immature bald eagle, by the way. It looks like it's probably close to 4 years old because it's just getting its white head. You can see that's just getting its white feathers, which they don't get till they're 4 or 5 years old. So it's a young one. But what happens is if you were to spray him with water, give him a shower, that thing would close over automatically. It's like a reflex. And also when they're flying, they can see through it. So these are goggles that keep the wind out of their eyes. Also, if they're diving in the water, keeps water out of their eyes. It's an extraordinary extra membrane that they have, the nictitating membrane. So they go with their own built-in goggles. Birds' eyes are actually larger than their brains. And their diurnal birds are birds that see during the day. They can actually see ultraviolet light. So they see more colors than we do. And the other thing about them is that if you were an eagle, they have incredible eyesight. We've also seen eagle eye. There's actually a company that makes binoculars called Eagle Optics. And the reason for that is that this is a newspaper. So if you were an eagle and you could read, that's stretching things a bit, but you could read the fine print in this newspaper from the end of a football field. That's how extraordinary their eyes are. And because they're inside, there's so much more eye than what meats show. We're the same. Our eyes are bigger than they appear from the outside because we have eyelids, but these guys' eyes are really enormous. And I like to do this for the kids, so I'm just going to do it for you because I have to make a fool of myself at least once in this presentation. And this is what we would look like if we had eyes the same size in proportion to an eagle. So I like to show that to the kids, and I like to have the kids do that when I have kids programs because it's wonderful to compare your own body to that of another animal. Okay, so the advantages of ultraviolet light. Well, flowers reflect UV light, revealing dark lines that point directly to the nectar within insects. So insects have this ability too. It penetrates cloud cover. And so they can actually see the sun position during migration, which is really important. And we also think that even though we often say that, like, here's a two-seater waxwings, we often think that birds that we say are not sexually dimorphic, meaning there's no difference in color between the male and the female, and you often wonder, well, how can they tell each other apart? Well, they do, and we think that it may very well be that they're seeing ultraviolet colors and patterns in the feathers of an opposite sex that we can't see with our human eyes, but they can see very clearly. So there's so much about them that is so amazing and extraordinary, and we don't really understand everything. I'm sure it's just the tip of the iceberg of how we know what we know about birds. And again, even what I'm sharing with you is what science believes right now. It could change tomorrow with a new discovery. A new theory could come out. So I'm sharing with you what science believes at the moment. And remember, it's knowledge that has been gained by experimentation and repetition of experiments. But even then, things could change. But this is the latest that I'm sharing with you now. Feathers are amazing, and because birds are directly descended from dinosaurs, that's the truth, their feathers are actually evolved reptilian scales. And if you were to look at them up really close, you could see some of the beautiful patterns in them. It's made of the same stuff as our fingernails. It's keratin. It's interesting with birds is they molt symmetrically. And when I say that, if you look at the wing of a bird within ornithology, every feather on a bird's wing is numbered and identified as a primary, a secondary, a tertiary. They're all different types of feathers that make up a feather, a wing. And within those feathers, if the bird loses primary number 2 on the right wing, then the next feather that's going to molt off of that bird is going to be primary feather number 2 on the left wing. And it's a wonderful thing when you think about that with nature, because what it means is this bird is always perfectly balanced for flight. If it were to drop all its feathers on one side, it couldn't fly. The same thing is true with the tail feathers. And it's fun to watch a large bird of prey, for instance, up in the sky, and you can see where the feathers have been molting in the tail or in the wings, and you'll notice that you will see that the pattern is identical on both sides, or there's one tail feather missing on one side, and you have to know that the one on the other side in the exact same place on the opposite side of that tail is going to be the next one to go. So they do molt symmetrically, which I think is an amazing adaptation. Feather care is their biggest priority. To see a bird preen is a healthy bird. Poor feather quality is a very serious sign of illness, and it's something that that people who have pet birds know, that if the feathers are ruffled or don't look good, something is seriously wrong with the bird, and we see that in the wildlife hospital as well. So people always say, how do hummingbirds sparkle? Well, they say sparkle because color comes in 2 ways for birds. One is in pigment, and the other is in structure. And in some birds, and that would be all birds with blue feathers, and in hummingbirds, and that's true of some other birds as well, it's a prism effect. It is not a color. So just like water is really not blue and the sky is really not blue, what is it's filtering out every other color in the spectrum except blue. So if we were in person together today, I'd be passing around the feather of a jay. And if you look at a jay's feather, you notice, if you've ever watched a jay, if they turn in a certain direction, or even a great blue heron turns in a certain direction, they turn gray. They don't look blue. And you wonder, well, why is it called a blue heron? Why don't they call it a gray heron? And sometimes these guys in particular really look dark. They don't, and especially in the shade. And even bluebirds in a certain angle, they just simply don't look like they have any color. That's because blue is not a pigment in birds. It is a prism, a structure in the feathers that is refracting everything but blue in that color. With hummingbirds, the structure of their feathers is iridescent and sparkling, but if they turn in one direction, they become very dull. And if they turn back in another direction, then their feathers, particularly the feathers around this area, really sparkle, really sparkle. And that is, again, that's a prism effect, not just blue, but other colors as well. It's refracting all of these gorgeous colors. Recent research, it tells us that hummingbirds know that if they face in a certain direction, they can make their feathers sparkle more than others. And so literally with research, they've come to the conclusion that male hummingbirds do not do any courtship on a dull, sunless day, because there's no point in trying to attract a female when you haven't got pretty feathers that'll sparkle, because there's not enough sun out there. So I think that's kind of an interesting design. So now you know why hummingbirds sparkle, and also that blue feathers are really not blue. How do they fly? Well, if there are any aviators out there, you know that it's more than just lift and thrust, acceleration and drag. But for purposes of this demonstration, those are the easiest things to describe in birds. So look at how we have biomimicked the shape of flight. Look at how we've done that. And that is absolutely no accident that we have copied that. These flaps determine direction and height, and they instinctively know just how to do that. Remember, the alula is right there. That thumb is right there directing those wings so that it can turn easily. So lift and thrust are the legs and the wings. So they jump on their toes, get up in the air, or they jump off of a perch or off of a branch. But they need, and sometimes they have to run in order to do that. But they need to get that thing going, because the acceleration then, by dropping from a high perch or cliff or running or skimming on the water and flapping their wings, causes this lift to happen. And the tail is the navigation. That's the control stick, and a really important part of a bird's ability to fly. So all of these things, that's why we put tails on airplanes. You know, they're not just flat little things. There's really something back there, because we realize that is really important. And I didn't mean to move that yet. So they fly because they have hollow bones, and because by the law of physics, their body mass and the ability of the length and width of their wings in order to create the lift is perfect for that particular species. Bald eagles have really 6-foot wingspan, and they're pretty heavy birds. The females are around 11 to 13 pounds. The males are around 8 pounds. That's a lot of bird to lift, and they need really big, powerful feathers and a really, really strong breastbone, a keel right here, which is really important. So they have a strong, light skeleton. They have pneumatic bones to store additional air. They have additional air sacs, like oxygen tanks, 5 of them inside their body. Now these guys, the ostrich, emu, and cassowary, have lost their ability to fly, so their air sacs are almost non-existent. They don't need them anymore. Their hemoglobin is also super packed with oxygen, so they have more red blood cells than we do in their oxygen. And you know, if people move to high altitude places like, for instance, Peru, either you have to carry oxygen with you when you first get there until your body adjusts, or you do actually do like blood doping. That's exactly what it is. It's adding more oxygen to fuel the muscle, and that's what that's all about. Their fused bones in their hands are for rigidity and strength. Their feathers are structured to catch the wind. And I would be handing a feather around to you, because if you wave a feather, you can feel the resistance. You can really feel it. And I remember handling a condor feather, which, you know, is huge. Their wingspan is around 12 feet. And that thing, you know, it almost knocked me over. I mean, it was the power of that lift. Also, I want you to notice, look at the shape of that feather. Okay, so that's called an airfoil. And if you notice, we do this on our cars. So when we're driving, you know, the airfoil helps with speed. And so their feathers are actually shaped in that beautiful airfoil shape as well. They also have an enlarged keel for powerful flight muscles. And I think I have a picture of one somewhere. We'll come to it in a minute, I think. But the keel is like on a ship, you know, how you have that pointed part on the front. So if you've ever carved a turkey, you know that the keel, that breastbone, is a big sharp thing that comes up. That's because it has to hold a really big, thick muscle, which is the best part of the turkey to eat, right? Well, that's where a powerful bird that needs to fly, this breast muscle is really, really strong. And that keel has to be deep enough so that that muscle can attach to it in a really large way. So why do birds migrate? Well, they got something called Zugunruha. And guess what? You have it too. We call it spring fever. Sometimes we just say we're itchy and antsy. I think we're all feeling that right now with the pandemic and being stuck inside. It's the German word for restlessness. And what happens in wildlife and why they migrate, now we don't know everything about it, but this is the current theory, is that when the season changes, the sun is in a different place in the sky. And that means that the light from the sun is hitting the retina of the eye in a different place. And that stimulates a hormonal change in the body that makes birds antsy and want to migrate, also other animals as well. So this is an irresistible force. It's an actual biological change. It's a change in hormones, and we get it too when we decide it's time to clean out the closets, even though everybody's doing that now with the pandemic. But normally in spring, that's when we would get everything ready for summer, and then at the end of summer, it's like, I can't wait for hot chocolate and wear boots and sweaters and sit by the fire. We're all changing our hormonally, and we're getting that restlessness, and we're needing a change. So when people say, don't put for bird feeders out, it will make the birds not migrate, that's just simply not true. It's an old wives' tale. Birds migrate as an irresistible force. It's Zugun Ruha, and you have it too. So why do they fly in formations? Well, they fly in formations because it's safer. Sometimes it's less work. So they draft and slipstream, and it's very much like what we have done. So you see these are our Canada geese here, but we use it in bicycle racing, even in roller derby, and in NASCAR. It's this wonderful idea of slipstreaming, and it's causing this downward push forward that helps these guys. This guy is being helped by this guy behind it because he's causing this drafting or slipstreaming. The same thing is happening here. This bird is working the hardest. These birds are working a little less hard, and that drafting is going all the way down. Notice this guy's going to come in. These guys, geese are wonderful, you know. Stop and watch them, because you say, oh, it's just geese, they're everywhere. But stop and watch them when they're flying, because they will slow down and let this guy come in. Then when this one gets tired, this one's going to slip back somewhere in here, and another goose is going to come up and take his place. So they always are in this formation. So they're using this to help each other on long distances, just like we do, and this is biomimicry for us again. Animals have so much to teach us. The air behind it and off to the sides gets pushed upwards, or that's called an upwash. There are all sorts of wonderful aerodynamic laws of physics that are in operation here that the birds are using, because again, remember, they're always looking for the easiest way, use the least calories they can. It's all about efficiency and use of energy in order for them to get to their destination or whatever it is they're trying to do. So starlings, this is a starling. This is a European starling. They're absolutely beautiful birds. They are an invasive species. They cause crop damage, and they cause airplanes to crash because they get into the intake engines, but they are breathtakingly beautiful birds anyway. The reason that they are in the United States is because there was a gentleman back in the late 1800s, I believe, who felt that America needed to have all the birds that Shakespeare had mentioned in all of his literature and plays. So this guy collected birds. It was the Shakespeare Society, and they literally deliberately brought these birds over to the United States. And this was before people understood anything about the seriousness of bringing in an invasive species. They just did it because they felt America needed some class and some culture, and having the birds that Shakespeare had mentioned in his plays was a really important thing to do. But what's really cool about these guys is the fact that they can fly in these beautiful, beautiful murmurations. And I want to show you this because this is pretty spectacular. These are starlings. Watch that all day, but we got to move on. What's interesting about starlings is that why would they do this? Well, first of all, how do they do it? The way they do it is that they are so tuned in as almost one singular mind, similar to, say, a chorus that is aware of the bass and the sopranos and the altos and all the different parts, and they sing in a unified force, and they're tuning in on each other. The same thing is true with these guys. They are looking at, they're feeling the wing flap of the birds around them, and they're reacting like a single organism. They're also seeing the other birds out of the corner of their eye, and they're just almost unconsciously moving in this unison. They do this mostly to escape peregrine falcons. This is like trying to hit a moving target. So this is for safety, and it's mostly peregrine falcons that just have a devil of a time catching these guys when they're flying in these kind of formations. So I want to talk about language innateness. Noam Chomsky, a very famous linguist, believes that we are even at birth or before birth, that we have a certain innate ability to understand. It may be because we're hearing sounds in the womb, we're really not sure, but we kind of know more than we realize without knowing what the words mean. There are universal aspects of all languages, human and non-human, that we can understand simply by tone, pattern, tempo, and cadence. And I have a picture of a French cafe here, because if any of you have ever been to a foreign country and sat at a cafe or a restaurant or even in a park or even here in our multi-diverse community and heard people having a conversation in another language that we didn't understand, you may not know exactly what they're saying, but the reality is that you know if they're talking in a friendly manner. Are they two lovers? Are they having an argument? Is one telling a funny story? Are they gossiping? Are they complaining about somebody? What is going on? You can tell by that cadence, tone, pattern, tempo. You can tell all of those things. And you know what? You can tell that with animals too. Years ago, actually Native Americans have a wonderful tradition in their storytelling, whereas in the West we say once upon a time. In Native American culture, they often begin their stories when the world was new and people and animals could talk to each other. And I love that because that's really the truth. Somewhere in our Western philosophies, we have stopped our connection with nature. And you can tell a call from an animal that is in distress, from an animal that is calling out to its mate or its friends. You know a warning call, you know if there's danger. You know all of these things. Don't think you don't. You get a gut feeling, trust your gut, because that's probably what's happening. So what are they saying or not saying? Well, first of all, birds are most vocal early in the morning and late afternoon. So the first thing in the morning, they're calling out as if to say, hello, here I am, where are you? This is what I'm gonna do, it's a lovely day, where's my mate, where's my friends, where's the rest of the group, etc. And in the afternoon, it's okay, I had a good day, how are you, where you been, what you doing, can we get back together, where are we gonna sleep tonight, sort of thing. But in the middle of the day, you will hear them contact with others, you will hear courtship. Sometimes they're calling to define the size of their territory. The perfect example of that I'm going to play for you is the blackbird. I believe I have that one because that one is the red-winged blackbird. Red-winged blackbirds are marsh birds. You often see them out in wetlands, and they'll sit at the top of a reed, a really tall reed, and they'll just sing their little hearts out. Well, what they're most likely doing is they're saying to another male, listen, if you can hear me, this is my territory, get out of town. Or if you can hear me and you're a girl, come on in because I found a great place to make babies. So I want you to listen to, it's a beautiful sound that they make. They're a member of the Oriole family and they have a beautiful voice. So take a listen to this. Now that's just friendly. That's just a friendly, here I am, where are you? I can tell. But if he started, really squawking and making a really, 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 really loud sound, he's saying either get away from me, you're a predator, and most likely that's what he's doing, or it's going to be a bird that's questioning his territory, that's just trying to come into his territory. So that's what you can tell. You can tell they're singing because they're just happy. Robins do that all the time, just sit in the trees and call to each other. And I'm going to play a robin for you too, because they're the most common bird that we hear. And they have an absolutely beautiful voice as well. This is the American robin as opposed to the European robin, which is a tiny little bird and a completely different bird. But this is the American robin. And you've heard this a million times. So does that sound friendly or frenzied and worried? No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. So that bird is also called calling out for probably others of its kind. So here I am, where are you? So you know that that's okay. But if you hear, for instance, crows just screaming and carrying on like you wouldn't believe, I'll tell you right now, what they're saying is that there's something going on. There's some sort of an argument going on. It might be another crow, but it could also be a hawk. It could be a squirrel. It could be a cat or a dog, or it could even be you. The same thing is true if suddenly the birds are singing like crazy and all of a sudden it's just silence. The same thing has happened. Something is out there and they need to be quiet. This is when you want to be looking up into the trees and see if you can find out why. It's really fun if you find that hawk, either a Cooper's probably, or a red tail, maybe even an owl, but you're going to find the bad guy, or it's a bad guy because there's no such thing in nature, but you're going to find that predator that everybody's hiding from. So I want you to be aware of that, because it's really fun to suddenly notice, wait a minute, it's so quiet now. Why is that? And see if you can find out the reason. Or you hear all this yelling and screaming and hollering, something's going on. Go find out what it is. Go and see if you can find what they're doing and what's happening. There's stuff going out there all the time. If you hear one bird calling, you might in the distance hear one just like it calling back, and you know they called for their mate. So it's really fun to be able to do that. So I just thought this was a cute little thing. I can't see you guys laughing and smiling, but I think this is this is just kind of a cute little thing. It's hard to find bird humor, but I thought this was a pretty good one. Okay, so birds have a two-part vocal box called a syrinx. That allows them to sing two songs at the same time, creating a two-part harmony. Now we have a larynx, we can't do that, but they can do that. Now you heard that in the red-winged blackbird, that's this little guy right here. But there are so many birds that make the most beautiful sounds, and all of them can do this. They can all split, they have two actual parts of the vocal box. I think I've got a picture for you. And I want to play this. This is the lyrebird. This is considered the most beautiful singing bird in the world, and this is in Australia. Australia always seems to have these extraordinary animals, but I want you to listen to the sounds of this bird and notice the harmonics involved. Okay, we could listen to that all day. Isn't that fantastic? Let me just go back over here so we're not distracted. So let me stop him. Stop. Okay. Now, what's interesting is that you could hear more than one sound. You could also notice that he was making the sounds that almost sounded like he'd listened to somebody playing a video game. And that's quite possible because many species of birds copy the other sounds of other birds. And in many cases, the bird with the most songs, the boy with the most songs, gets the girl. So it's actually something they build their repertoire on. That's certainly true of the mockingbird. In California, we had one that lived in our backyard. Like my husband, he would bark like the dog. He could beep like the microwave oven. He could make the sound of a truck backing up. He was adding a repertoire all the time. Jays do that a lot here. They often imitate red-tailed hawks. And often it's because they want to prey on the babies. And they will go in and, peck at them and eat them. And they'll make the sounds of other birds because that way the babies hear them and think, oh, mom's home for dinner. I'm going to stick my head up out of the nest. So there's lots of reasons for that. Also good. So listen for those sounds and notice the harmonics. Many composers throughout history, Mozart had a pet starling. Schubert loved the fact that birds sang in harmony and used a lot of that in his music. And so there's a lot of history in music development in the classics based on the bird, the fact that it's got this wonderful syrinx. So building a nest. This is a real nest. Believe this is a bed, and you can buy this bed online, by the way. It's only $5,000. It doesn't look very comfortable to me, but it is actually something you can buy. You can go on Amazon and you can buy it if you want. So how does an animal without hands or tools build a nest? Well, birds are avian architects. They are just absolutely amazing. And they use principles of architecture and engineering in order to build those nests. Like, remember that they don't learn how to do this from mom and dad because they never saw mom and dad make the nest. This is hardwired, intuitive knowledge. And every bird of that same species makes exactly the same kind of nest. How and why, we don't know. But it is a miracle to behold. So they start with the architectural principle of three. It's a tripod shape, and it's either going to be a hanging nest that's hanging down, is going to be attached by three branches, or a nest that's in a tree is going to have, might be the tree stump or the trunk, and then two branches. It could be three branches out on a limb, but it's always going to have this principle of three. That's absolutely important. They start with finding the right foundation, that tripod shape, then they frame it, then they fill it in, then they shape it and line it, and then they decorate the outside. Just like we would build a house and the last thing we would do is put in the landscaping. That's exactly what they do. So these are the tripod structures, and you can see it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. There's got to be another branch over there that we can't quite see. With their hanging down, they do this tripod, then they frame it. So they start throwing all these leaves on until they get the frame. Then they fill in the spaces. And they might fill in with leaves. They might fill it in with feathers, with moss, with plant stuffs like cottonwood, fluff, and all sorts of things like that. Then they shape it, and I call this the bird hokey pokey, and I have a video I'm going to show you in a minute, where at the very end, they actually get in the middle of the nest, and they stick their little butts up in the air, and they twirl around and around and around until all of this lining inside twirls and twirls and twirls and twirls into this perfect little round shape. That's what they do. This is a hummingbird's nest. Hummingbirds' nests are made out of spider web. Spider silk is stronger, has a stronger tensile strength than steel. That's how extraordinary that is. So they know what they're doing. So this is a robin making a nest, and I want you to watch him do the little hokey pokey at the end. It's really fun to watch. First, he's going to throw stuff on there and just hope it sticks. Basically, just throw it on, hope it sticks. Some of it falls down and some of it doesn't. So he keeps throwing, some of it's toppling over. But eventually it sticks. Now he's going to add the mud. Whoop, all fell out, got to start over again. Oh boy, that's hard work. Here we go. Okay. Success this time. Now you're going to start to see the mud splatter all over it. He's going to start throwing the mud in. That comes next. And then the hokey pokey. Can you see the hokey pokey? Spin around and spin around. Slap out that mud and make that perfect nest. Isn't that fun? I love that. I love that video. A hummingbird does it a little bit differently. They're more weavers, and so this mama is making a nest with spider silk. Let's watch this one. So she's done the same thing. She stuck a bunch of fluff on there first to see if it's going to stick to that tripod shape. And now she's going to keep working at it, but now she's going to start adding things and sewing with her beak. So she literally sews. She looks like she's got some cottonwood fluff in there. She's going to find feathers, stick it in. And then you're also going to see her, she's going to have some spider silk that she's going to add and wrap it around and sew, literally sew the spider silk around and around. There's her tongue sticking out there. So she's adding a little bit of saliva to sort of smooth things out. She's checking it out to see if it feels right. Not quite, still working on it, still working on it. So it takes these guys. There, she's got something there. She's got something she's sticking in there. Another little twig, that's good. Throw that in there too. Needed it in one little spot. So it takes them about, go back, up this way. Sorry, still learning this system. All right, so it takes birds about 2 weeks to build a nest. So think about a robin back and forth with a little bit of mud from a stream, a river, a creek, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, little tiny mouthfuls of mud, back and forth, 2 solid weeks to make a nest. I wanted to point out these nests because squirrel drays, and they sometimes can look like a crow's nest, but they're all leafy. You can see how it's all this leaf matter. Squirrels make a round domed a nest that's actually covered and with a hole that they crawl in somewhere in here. But what's fun about these is that, first of all, don't mistake them for a bird's nest. But when fall comes, it is fun to see when the leaves come down off the trees. You can see all the squirrel drays that are left behind, and it's kind of fun for me to do that. I just want to sort of throw that in for the fun of it. Oops, we're going the wrong way. Okay, I just found this and thought that was just very, very clever. People can be so clever. All right, question and answer time. So I'm going to hand this over and see if anybody's got any questions so far.
Hi, Marilyn. Of course, we've had lots of questions come in. Very fun presentation so far. So you mentioned about feeders, and someone lives in the Mount Hood area and likes to feed their birds in the coldest parts of winter, but wondering about leaving them out year round. What's your recommendation?
I'm going to touch upon this later in the presentation, but I will just say that it's okay to feed them year round. You don't worry about that, because even there are some birds that might migrate, some might not come to your feeder, but there's also birds that are passing through. They're on their way down from, say, Alaska or British Columbia or Canada, and they're moving through, and it's lovely for them to have that extra food on the way. So my advice is always keep your feeders filled year round. I think it's a wonderful thing to do. Anna's hummingbirds manage to get through. They don't seem to, they don't migrate, they stick around. They might move to slightly warmer climes. I don't know if Hood River would be included in that, but by all means, some people will wrap the hummingbird feeder in a little bit of like bubble wrap or something to sort of keep it from the liquid from freezing. The red that's actually on the feeder itself, you never color the food, but that will often attract them. So the old wives' tale that if you leave a feeder out, the birds will not migrate is simply an old wives' tale. It's not true. So please do, and all the birds that are passing through, the occasional migrants that are coming through in particular, will be very grateful. And it's harder for birds in the winter to find food. So please continue to do that, but keep those feeders clean. You should wash them out at least once a week.
Okay, good to know. How come some birds bounce in their flight and some don't? Does that have to do with their wings or the species?
It's a species thing. And again, that is that economy of using energy. In some cases, it's swooping like that is a way to get from point A to point B with using less wing flaps in order to do it. It's very fast. Also, it's a bit of a zigzag, and makes it a little safer for them if there's a predator in the area. So lots of birds do that, and it's economy of energy, and also it's a way to make it more difficult to catch them in flight, and particularly for Cooper's hawks. I'm sure Cooper's hawks wish that songbirds would simply not fly like that.
And kind of related with flying, can a bird fly without a tail?
No, it cannot. It cannot. It might be able to, flutter a bit, but no, it needs a tail. So there are people who think that it's a good way to stop a predator bird from harming its feeders by cutting its tail. It won't be able to fly as well. No, you just condemned it to starvation and death, it's illegal and it's cruel. So no, birds cannot fly without a tail, just like an airplane.
And then can birds lose their goggles, or do they have them forever?
They
If they
have them
lose
for,
their eyesight, will their goggles be damaged as well?
um, it's just an intricate part of their anatomy. So unless there's an injury of some sort, those nictitating membranes are just part of their biology, just like our eyelids are part of ours. So they've got three eyelids. They've got the top, the bottom, and then the one that goes from the middle of the face, out to the corner of the eye. So no, it's a permanent part of their anatomy unless there's an injury.
Good. So there's two questions about starlings. When you were talking about the starlings and showed that, they've sometimes been regarded as like a pesty or bad bird. And then, so what would you say about that, kind of the reputation? So they say, how long have starlings been in the country? And they are often seen as a pesty or bad bird. And why is that?
Well, I don't like the word bad because I don't think there's that in nature there is nothing that's really bad. But well, maybe the coronavirus, I take it all back. But they're an introduced species here, so they're not native to North America, and introduced species don't know the rules. So what happens, just like we have, I compare them. The best way to compare them is to a Himalayan blackberry, and if you know how destructive and how wild they become and how difficult they are, starlings are kind of the Himalayan blackberry in the bird world. They're exquisitely beautiful. They're super, super smart. But the trouble is they don't belong here and they don't play by the rules. They just don't know how to behave. So they push out our native species. And we have precious little habitat for our birds as it is. Last year, apparently we lost 30 million birds in the United States from loss of habitat. So having something that's our native birds competing with a non-native is a problem. Now, it's difficult for me because I love all animals and starlings are beautiful, but they also cause billions of dollars of crop damage, not only here in Oregon, but all over the United States. And they also cause problems at airports and with murmurations can be very, very dangerous for airplanes, but also that they'll fly into the intake engines. So they really are an invasive species. And if I were speaking for Audubon, when we get them in as injured, they're euthanized immediately because they are considered invasive. We do not rehab them or ever release them. We never advise anybody to do that. And I have to agree with that because they are just like a Himalayan blackberry. They're really not good for us here. And it's a shame that they were introduced at a time before people understood the dangers of invasive species. So they are beautiful though, but no, they're not. They shouldn't be here, and it's a shame that they are because they're causing problems.
Well, that leads, you mentioned about habitat, and we have a question here curious about what threats are facing bird populations today. I don't know if you might be covering that later.
Uh, I will be covering a little bit later. I'll just say
Okay.
that there is a classic answer that every naturalist would say, and it's always the same three words. The biggest danger facing wildlife today, including birds, is loss of habitat. That's the biggest issue. And I will go over a little bit more later on in the presentation about how to attract birds into your yard and how to support them. So we'll be talking a little bit about that. But loss of habitat is the biggest thing. We're losing trees, there's pesticide use. So habitats can be lost in lots of different ways. And it's not just that they're no longer there, but that what is there has been contaminated as well. So yeah, it's tough, and migratory paths are being disturbed. So it's a tough life out there for all wildlife, but loss of habitat, that's the standard answer, and it's still the truth, sadly.
Yeah. So, because he was worried about sometimes his cat that he has for mice also brings in birds.
Yep.
So anything you might want to touch on that, and then otherwise, I think we'll get back to your presentation and answer more of these at the end.
Okay, well, I'll because you can't say it too many times. Cats kill over 5 million birds a day in the United States. So it goes into the billions by the end of the year. And so we always say, I know that if you're a farmer or a rancher, you have a ranch cat that kills mice, and I get that. You would think that if they're eating enough mice, they just don't want to be bothered with birds. But predator is a predator. So if you have a house cat that likes to go out in the garden, my recommendation is please keep your cat inside, not only for its own safety from leukemia and coyotes and great horned owls and all the things that are out there, but also because they kill birds. And have a catio. You can Google that online. There's all kinds of wonderful designs where you can build an enclosure where they can even sit on a windowsill with a little box, wired box on the outside on a shelf like an old-fashioned air conditioner, and they can sit out there and look at the birds and make all the funny noises they want, but not be able to get to them. So that's my answer about cats. I love cats, but they need to stay indoors.
Great. Well, thanks, Marilyn. We'll let you get back to the presentation and learn more about birds.
Okay, wonderful. Here we go. I don't even remember what I was going to say next, so let's see what it is. There we go. We're going to talk a little bit about the birds you're most likely to see in the forest. And the first one is the great horned owl. And I have a wonderful sound for you of the great horned owl. It's really fabulous. And so I want you to hear this. Where are my owls? So this is the classic sound of nature and the wild, and absolutely fantastic. And this guy is one of my favorite birds, of course. So let me see if I can find him now, because I just had him a minute ago. Here we go. It's number 2. Okay. So here's the great horned owl. Oh no, sorry, that's the wrong one. Excuse me, wrong one. That was actually a screech owl. Let me see. Where's my great horned owl? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Sorry. Here we go. Okay, so that's the classic sound. Now, not all owls make that noise, by the way. Lots of other owls make different sounds, but that's your classic great horned owl. One thing about them, if you want to know if an owl hunts dead of night, everybody thinks all owls are nocturnal. That's not true. This guy's actually crepuscular. Crepuscular is one of my favorite words, and it means it hunts at twilight. So the most likely to see these guys out hunting is when the sun first goes down and when the sun first goes up, and those yellow eyes will tell you that. All black eyes, like in a barn owl, means it's a dead of night hunter. Now, one thing that's cool about owls, and I have a feather here, and I hope that you can see this, is this is a Canada goose feather, and if you look at it, you can see that it's got a very sharp edge on it. I hope you can see that okay. Very sharp edge. If you look at an owl feather, and this is a great horned owl feather, you can see that it's very kind of fringed. There's this ruffly kind of stuff there, and the texture of it is very, very soft. The reason for that is owls, when they fly, make no noise whatsoever. It's called silent flight. And this little fringe on the end, if I were to wave this, and if you could hear it, you can actually hear the wing flapping. But if I wave this, there's no sound whatsoever. So that's a wonderful way for them to catch a predator, a prey, and the prey never, ever hears them coming, which is pretty extraordinary. Also, you can see what an exquisitely beautiful feather that is. And in great horned owls, there's so many different patterns on their feathers, but they are just positively exquisite. Okay. So they normally nest in cavities. Most owls nest in cavities, a couple of exceptions. Barn owls like to be in attics and in church steeples and in barns on flat surfaces. They'll lay their eggs on a flat something, and it's just mind-boggling, but that's what they do. But most owls like to be in cavities, and they can excavate a little bit, but not very much. Usually they wait for a woodpecker, or maybe it's even a raccoon that had used it before. They usually nest around October, so it's off season when the other animals have finished having their babies, and there's plenty of places to borrow. I took this picture myself. I'm very proud of it. This was done at Sauvie Island, and this is a great horned owl that decided to use and no longer used red tail nest, and just decided it would use that instead. And the joke with a great horned owl is, where does a great horned owl make a nest? The answer, wherever it wants, because these guys are the lions of the sky, and they are just incredible. Chickadee is one of my favorite birds that you'll see at the feeder. Tiny little things, absolutely beautiful. Not much bigger really than a hummingbird, just a little bit bigger, but much fatter and rounder. They are grab it go at the feeder. So when you see them at the feeder, they'll go and get something, then they'll grab it, and then they take it to a branch, and then they hold it down with their foot, and they peck away at the shell or the seed, and that's what they do. I love the fact that their call is also what they are called, and that means that a chickadee says chickadee dee dee. So I'm going to play that for you because that's a great sound, and I'm going to tell you a little something that scientists have learned about that chickadee's call, which I think is pretty amazing. So I'm going to play the chickadee. So when you hear a chickadee go chickadee dee dee, that's what they say. And that pretty much is a contact call. That's saying, here am I, where are you? But if they did a study, someone did their master's degree study on this, and what they learned was that the chickadee, when there's something wrong, it's upset. It could be a predator, it could be an interloper in its territory. It will go chickadee dee 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 dee. And if you count the number of D's, that tells you something's going on. So it's a fun thing to do, to listen to them. Most of the time you'll hear them just say chickadee dee dee, but if they start going dee 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 dee, that's another reason to look up and see what's going on. It could be just another bird, it could be a hawk that they're warning others about. It's a really, really fun thing to do. And I have a cute story about that. A couple of years ago, my son and his wife lived here with me while their house was being remodeled. And I was taking my then 5-year-old grandson to the bus stop to, get the school bus. And a chickadee in the tree right outside in front of my house started singing away. And it went chickadee dee 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 dee. And here's my little Daniel, age 5, stops and goes, "Grandma, something's happening." Because he had learned from me that the number of D's in a chickadee tells you that something's going on out there in nature. And I thought that was just really fun. So you do the same thing now. You start counting those D's on the chickadees. So the northern flicker is an absolutely fabulous bird, and if I could pass around one of his tail feathers, I would. Woodpeckers are amazing. This is a ground feeding woodpecker. They have very distinctive orange shafts. So the shaft is the straight part, sort of like the middle of a leaf. Like it's like a vein on there. It holds the feathers together, and they're very, very stiff. So when he's sitting on the side of a tree, he's literally rappelling like he would rappel down a tree. Someone who's repairing like the telephone lines or something, and they have to rappel down. He's actually pressing his tail with this hard, it's almost like a steel rod in the middle of the feather to hold himself down. They have a beautiful sound. They're really loud mouths. They remind me a bit like of a red-shouldered hawk, which is also a very loudmouth bird if you took my raptor class earlier. But these guys are very distinctive, and you hear these a lot when you're in the forest. So if you're walking anywhere and you hear this sound, you're wondering what it was. This is what it is. There it's drilling right there. That's the drill. Okay. So they have this wonderful call that is really loud, and you hear that, and I bet a lot of you are nodding your head saying, I've heard that. Oh my gosh. These are I found this online. I wanted to share this. These are 2 northern flickers doing a mating dance. This is courtship. I have never seen this before. I thought this was so cool. So I wanted to share this with you. okay, that's sort of like a stage minute. So come on, hurry up and do it again, guys. So I just thought that was just an amazing thing. You might get lucky sometime and be able to see that. So we have some wonderful birds here, including the American goldfinch, which is here. And we also have a lesser finch as well, which is smaller. They are very, very frequent at our our feeders, and they prefer the thistle, which is the black Niger thistle, Niger, I believe. But they nest in bushes and trees about 4 to 20 feet high, or near marshes. The female builds the nest, but the male does attend and help her with the babies. And they're absolutely stunning. This is the classic goldfinch. This looks more to me like a lesser finch, which is more green and yellow, but it could also be the female. Sometimes it's hard to tell. It's actually too big, I think, to be a lesser, because the lessers are really little. They're almost just slightly bigger also than a hummingbird. And they're very, very common at our feeders, and I really enjoy them. So we have two hummingbirds that are here in the Willamette Valley, in sort of the Portland metro area. The hummingbirds are just only found, by the way, I want you to know, in North and South America. They're not found anywhere else in the world. North, South America, and the Caribbean, West Indies, that's it. Nowhere else in the world. So we are so privileged. So this is the one that's around year round and does not migrate. And this one is the rufous that we get March through September. And I've seen quite a few of them this year, which is really exciting. This beautiful, beautiful, rich rufous, which really is a Latin word for rusty. So you can see that beautiful color on them. They're absolutely stunning birds. And we are so fortunate. Don't ever take hummingbirds for granted, because people who live in other places in the world envy us no end about the beautiful hummingbirds that we have. So some of the fun stuff about them is they build their nests out of lichen, moss, and spider webs. And what's really cool about them is that those nests are stretchable. So they literally are sort of like little elastic swaddling. And so as the babies grow, the nest sort of tugs them in, keeps them nice and warm and tight. Mama will take her own feathers from her breast, and she might find other animal fur, and she will literally line that nest. And then, just to make it pretty, just for the heck of it, as far as we know, she will add lichen to the outside just to make it absolutely beautiful. And I happen to have one here that was given to me by a person that worked for a company that taught about trees and birds. And if you can see, I put those two little fake eggs in there, but they're approximately the size of Tic Tacs. That's how small they are. And you can see the try. Can you see the try? 1, 2, 3. So you can see the 3 parts that went into this nest. And this is quite soft and spongy, and you can see the lichen is on the outside. So pretty fabulous, amazing little nest. Their little beaks are short when they begin. You can see that, how short they are. And then they grow as the baby gets older. So they really are like Pinocchio. It grows as they get older. Another interesting thing is that as a wildlife rehabber, I've raised a lot of orphaned baby hummingbirds. And one of the interesting things, in order to get them to gape, in order to feed them, you have to literally blow on them. And what you're doing is you blow on them, and that makes them open their mouth. And that's similar to mama coming in for a landing, and they feel the wind from mama's wings, and so then they open up their little mouths. Now that gives you a split second to feed them. And let me tell you, they're about the size of, you can see how little it's, see that there's the thumbnail, and look at the size of the bird. That's a small target for a syringe that's got baby bird formula, hummingbird formula, which is not just sugar, but it's got all sorts of freeze-dried insects and other nutrients in it that's important for them to grow and to get the right flora in their guts. So sugar water isn't going to make it for a growing baby bird. And to try and nail that in, so tell you a story. So I was given a really tiny hummingbird, even smaller than this, to take home and feed over the weekend. And I got it home and I fed it, and I blew on it. It opened its little mouth, and I tried to get the syringe in the right place, and I missed, and I got sugar water and the formula all over the baby. So I call them up and say, uh-oh, I spilled sugar water on the baby. What should I do? And they said, you got to give it a bath. A bath. It's this big. It's like the size of my little fingernail. Oh my gosh. They said, well, what you do is you go in, you run the tap water until it's warm, and then you hold the baby in your hand, and then you just sort of, splash a little bit of water on it. Then you take toilet paper and you sort of dab the baby, and then you put the baby in your hand and you blow. And then you put the baby in a little box that's sitting on top of a heating pad, and you cover it, and it'll be fine. So I did all of that. I did all of that, and it was really a terrifying experience. But I did it, and look at how precious those little guys are. But in the end, I had to go lay down. I was so absolutely exhausted. And excuse me, I've lost my place. Oh, going the wrong way. Oh, excuse me. What have I done? Let me go back to from current slide. No, that's not going to help. We're going back the wrong. Excuse me. I'm almost finished here. Okay, so these are two little guys. Often you will see two in a nest. That's usually, they never do more than two. They never do more than two. So if you're going to feed hummingbirds, this is always what you do. Let's see if I can get this out of here. Go away. All right. So it's always 1 part sugar to 4 parts water, and you boil the water, stir in the sugar till clear, cool, and replace weekly or more. Please do not use that packaged stuff that you buy. It's absolutely garbage, and it has red dye in it, which is very detrimental. Do not use red dye. This color here that's painted already on the feeder is all the red you will ever need. You do not need red dye. Please don't. We've done research, and we find that it makes them sick. It can grow fungus. It can give them all sorts of serious problems. So I just thought this was a cute little cartoon, and it says, yes, I know you get gummy worms at grandma's, but here at home you get the real thing. And I think somebody sent that to me because I'm one of those kind of grandmas. Okay, so how do you attract birds to your property? Well, this is the very first thing. We talked about this early in the question and answer. Keep your cats indoors. Catio. I know if you've got a farm cat that's a problem, and I understand that. And hopefully farm cats are so well fed by the mice they catch that they're really not interested. But of course, as predators, they're going to grab what they can. So occasionally they're going to bring them in. But if you've got a cat in a home, in a neighborhood, please keep it indoors. I know the cat's not going to like it, but they're killing so many of our birds. Keep your feeders clean once a week. Give them a good scrub, hot soap and water, and then water and soap, and then give them a really good rinse. And then that's the really important thing. They love trees and bushes. If they have trees and bushes in which they can hide and they can fly down to the feeder, that's what's going to attract them as well. And water features are absolutely essential. I have 3 water features in my yard, and one of my greatest pleasures in my life is watching birds take baths at a feeder. But also, they won't really want to use this feeder if they can't immediately fly to a tree or a bush to escape if they're feeling a little vulnerable. So it's really important to make sure you have that. And native plants is everything, because native plants attract insects, beneficial insects, and it's important, and this is what these guys are needing to eat. So native plants will always bring more birds into your yard. Always, always, always. If you're going to put up a birdhouse, that's wonderful. Birds can use all the help they can get, but they're very, very picky. And do some research online to see what species are in your area that you want to attract, because hole size is very important. The depth from the hole to the down into the bottom of the box is super important. How high it is in the tree, which way it's facing, is there ample food, water, and cover nearby, and what species occur in your area. All of that is important. You can't just build it and they will come. I wish that was true, but only if they're in the area, and that's the species that you have. So purple finches are beautiful, but we don't really have a lot of them, and if you put up a purple finch box, it may not mean you're going to get purple finches, even as much as those boxes are beautiful. So this is the thing about birdhouses, is no perch, no sticking out perch like that. This is a great place for a snake or any other predator to reach in and help himself. It looks like this one has been absconded by, it's either a woodpecker has made it bigger or a squirrel has chewed it to move inside. But you don't want to have a stick coming out. The ones that they sell that have the sticks coming out are lovely to hang up on inside your house in your family room or something, your kitchen, but not in your garden. Now birds might use them, particularly first-year birds that don't have a lot of experience yet, but they're simply unsafe, and more experienced birds will not use them. So get bird boxes, bird perches, bird houses that do not have a perch of any kind on them. Feeders are important, but no platform feeders, please. You want tube feeders. You want tube feeders without any dye in it. Yeah, these are suet feeders are absolutely wonderful. Woodpeckers in particular are crazy for these things. Clean them weekly. Please clean them weekly. That's really important. Don't use platform feeders. The reason for that is birds eat and poop, eat and poop, eat and poop constantly. They do that because they have to be light enough to fly away in a heartbeat because something's after them. And so they're always removing anything extra in their bodies while they're bringing in more food. And any sick bird is going to contaminate all this seed if it's got something. This is avian pox. Can you see how horrible it's? They're like horrible blisters that grow on the bird and eventually kills the bird. We almost lost the whole population of finches in California several years ago because of avian pox that was traced back to platform feeders. So please don't use platform feeders ever. We're always worried here about things like West Nile virus and things like that. And anytime you have a platform feeder, you have problems with spreading disease in birds. So as pretty as they are, and they really are lovely things, please don't use them. So keeping feeders filled in the winter will not prevent birds from migrating. Migration is an irresistible force. Remember, we've all got it. Zoo, gun, woo-ha. And here's your homework. Listen to birds and guess what they are saying. Now you know a little bit more and you know you can trust your gut. Whoops. If you hear a danger call, look for the reason. How many D's did you hear in that chickadee call? Notice if they're walking or hopping, and notice when and if the blue turns to gray in a bird, and tell everyone you know what you have learned and protect them. But mostly important is enjoy them. And so my very last slide to you is this one. I hope you love birds. 2, it's economical. It saves going to heaven. And that's the end of my presentation.
Well, thank you, Marilyn. That was fascinating, all about the secret life of birds. Certainly learned some fun things along the way and some really fascinating things and helpful things as we build feeders and bird boxes, and especially as people go into summer and those fun projects with everybody. We have a couple more questions. We're just
Wonderful.
going to kind of remind people, since we are nearing the end of 4:30, we will stay a little bit extra over to answer some questions till 4:45. But remind people that next week, spacing and thinning of young stands, Bradworth or Robinson, will be up next Tuesday, June 16th at 10 o'clock. So register online, go to the knowyourforest.org and register for that. You can also look at the recordings of today's webinars and the other ones that we've had in the last few weeks. So with that, I will also post the closing poll. And while you're answering that closing poll, we'll move on with some more good questions. So the wrap-up poll, we really appreciate just getting to a few questions to you that you can tell us about what you thought of today's presentation and let us know your feelings on that. Marilyn, on a question about red-winged blackbirds, and someone says they think they've migrated from the east side of the state to the west side. They had never heard them over here until last summer. And I know I've seen them for several years, but obviously this person is in an area where they hadn't seen them here on the west side. What do you know about red-winged blackbirds and their migration?
Well, I know they're marsh birds, and because Oregon has got a lot of water, and a lot of wonderful marshland. I've been here for 8 years and I've seen them from the beginning. So I think it just depends on where you are. Every year is a little different for migration and where birds are. It has to do with food sources. There could have been a disruption in wherever their habitat was before, and so they've had to move on because loss of habitat can be either destroying a marsh or something's gone wrong there and there's been pesticide spill or something. So I can't really explain why they would have be in a place that they hadn't been before, but I think that's fabulous and celebrate that. How exciting is that to see them, because they are so beautiful and they're really fun to watch and they just sing their little hearts out all the time. A funny story, my husband, who was British, came to the United States after we got married, and we were out with my grandparents, my grandmother, who was such a wonderful naturalist, and he saw a red-winged blackbird for the very first time. He'd never seen one before, and he went, "Oh, what's the name of that red-winged blackbird?" To which my grandmother replied, "A red-winged blackbird," and we laughed about that for the next many years of marriage. And so that was really a fun thing. So I would say just enjoy and celebrate the fact that they're there, but they're always going to be wherever there's water and marsh. That's their favorite habitat. And we certainly have a lot of that here.
Awesome. So let me read you this one. It says, my sister heard a little bird making a lot of noise near her pump house. Then her dog found the nest on the ground with babies in it. She picked it up and put it up high on her potting bench, out of sight but secure. The bird stopped making noise. Did she do the right thing? And what should she have done with the nest?
Well, if she put the nest back up as high as she could in a safe place, she did exactly the right thing. That is always the best thing to do. The birds were making a fuss because the nest had been disturbed and the parents were trying to scare away the predator, whoever that was. And so that was really, she did exactly the right thing. And if she had called me in on the Audubon hotline, I would have told her to have done that. And if she told me she'd already done it, I would have praised her for doing exactly the right thing. So that was a perfect response. Always put the nest back if you can, always.
Great. What good are scrub jays? Someone must have a lot of scrub jays in their area.
I raised them for years. I was a species manager for scrub days, so ask away. What do you want to know?
That is just the question. I guess, what is their benefit? Maybe they are a pest to them, but
Oh,
what's the benefit of scrub jays?
okay. Well, they're part of our ecosystem. So how we measure benefit might be different from the way nature measures, but they are a native bird. If you're talking about the western scrub jay, they are a native bird. They are a member of the crow family, so they're corvids. And their stellar jays are their cousins, as well as crows, jays, magpies, and the Clark's nutcracker are all in the corvid family. Their niche in society is that they are predators. They also do plant seeds, though, so they will steal acorns from squirrels. But sometimes they'll also bury them as well. So you can thank them for helping, along with squirrels, to plant some of our forests. That's a really important thing that they do. Yes, they do eat other birds and they do kill other birds. That's part of their niche, and their job as well is to keep the population healthy. And they usually get the ones that there's something wrong with them. They're either were born, something was wrong, or thrown out of the nest, or they go and pick them off. Yes, it's ugly and cruel to see because nature is not kind, but that's part of their job. The other thing that all of these crows and jays do, including the scrub jays, is that they are sentinels. So they literally are watchers in the neighborhood or in the forest, and they warn all the other animals when there's a predator. So you'll hear a lot of screaming and hollering from the jays, and part of their job is they really are guarding the forest for all the animals there, and the animals really depend on that to know when something is going wrong. Just on a side note about corvids in general, crows and all of them, they are some of the smartest birds in the world. There are scientists that believe that they're as intelligent as a 6-year-old human. They are just amazing. They mate for life, which is unusual for songbirds. Songbirds don't do that. They're actually rather promiscuous, and a male robin can have 2 or 3 other girls on 2 or 3 other nests in the area, but they are monogamous. They lifelong partners, and they actually hold funerals for their fallen. So if you've ever seen that, where they're all making a fuss and there's a dead one on the ground, they actually hold a little ceremony and a little funeral for them. So it's just they're just part of the food chain. They're part of that necessary keeping the forest and the animal population sort of in tow. And they are very, very beautiful, in my opinion. So I know that there's a lot of people that don't like them because they eat other baby birds, and I know that, but it's their job. That's what the job they were given, their niche in nature. And that's just something that it's really hard not to anthropomorphize and judge that, but it's just who they are. And they're an important part of the food chain. And any loss in biodiversity is a loss in nature, period. So having them is just part of the web of life, and they're important for that reason.
Thanks, Marilyn. So we have a few more questions. Just wanted to thank everyone for participating in the poll, and remind everyone that not only will we have the 10 o'clock class next Tuesday, but if you might advance one more, we also have the 3 o'clock class next Tuesday, which is Rob Clark with the small engine care. And so you can register for either one of those classes anytime this week, and some more great information for next week. So the next question is, do any songbirds lay on dirt roads or in ground nests?
Yes, there are several birds that do that. There are a lot of the sparrows will make nests underneath bushes and in the brush, and also thrushes do that as well. Towhees are known to build nests way down, in the lower areas. So you're probably thinking about trying to think of the name of the bird that does that. It's more of a shorebird. There are quite a few birds that will build their nests, or just what we call a scrape nest, not really a nest, but it's just a scrape, and often their eggs are very spotted and very pointed and very camouflaged to look like rocks. So there are quite a few birds that do that. And what's interesting about nature, just like not everybody hunts at the same time of day, there are nocturnal and diurnal. There are animals that live in different places in the forest, some up high, some in the middle, some on the ground, some under the ground. They don't eat at the same time, they don't nest in the same places. So everybody's got sort of their own little assigned spot in the web of things. And I think that's a pretty cool thing. So if you want to look up scrape nests and birds who make scrape nests, that's where you will find a lot of information about the types of birds that do that.
Great. So back to starlings.
Mm-hmm.
We had some questions earlier, but this is about how might you keep starlings out of bird boxes for some of the larger species like owls. When the nest boxes with those large openings, how do you keep the starlings out of there?
Wow. I guess the thing you would need to do is just try and discourage them if you see them starting to build a nest. If you can disturb that nest, that's about the only thing you can do. The thing with it's illegal. Again, it's against the Migratory Bird Act to disturb any native species of bird who's building a nest, their eggs, their nests, their feathers, any of that. We can't touch it. They're protected by federal law. But for non-native species like starlings, it's okay to do that. So I would say that's probably your best bet, is to just, if you see them starting to make a nest, you can maybe scare them away, or go or climb up there and pull out the materials or whatever and discourage them. That's just about the only thing you can really do. And it's okay only because they are a non-native species. You cannot do that with chimney swifts, with swallows. You can't touch them. If they've already built a nest, they have to be left. But that's not true of starlings.
Good information. So this is we feed stellar jays, and we
Mm-hmm.
have a lot of them, but when I sit on the deck, they screech a warning that I'm there. Any way to let them know I'm not going to hurt them so they're not so noisy?
Well, I'm not sure that's exactly what they're doing. They're pretty smart. So I would say they're probably telling everybody else that the soup's on and come and get it. I'm guessing that they're not, because they'll come down and eat right out of your hand if you let them. I mean, they really will. So I'd say the interpretation of why they're screeching is probably more, ooh, that the nice person that feeds us is here. Come on, everybody. There's plenty for everybody. I'm kind of guessing that's what's going on. Sorry.
No, that's
They're
okay.
real stinkers. I mean, they really are. They can get, you can, if you feed one, it's like, oh boy, now you're in trouble.
They're all coming.
Yeah,
It's
they're
much
all,
like teenagers.
yeah, there's a lot of comparison there. I often said that if I had two grown kids, but I thought if I'd been a rehabber first, I probably wouldn't have rescued them as often, because you learn to teach animals to be independent and self-sufficient, and you don't pick them up and help them and rescue them all the time. And I think I would have I did a good job. They're both great, grown up, successful adults, but I think I would have been a better mom if I'd been a rehabber first. I learned that principle about them.
Well, they say thanks for the answer. That makes them feel better.
Okay,
So,
good. They might
and
end up bringing gifts as well, because they will do that. So she or he starts to find funny little things. It could be a feather, a rock, an acorn, something shiny. It could just be a little piece of something odd. What is that doing there? Where did that come from? That's them saying thank you.
oh, interesting. Well, that's the end of the questions. We also had someone that pretty much wrote my ending for me. They said, "Thank you so much, Marilyn. Your love for birds and extensive knowledge really shows.
Oh, thank you.
I'm sure you're great with your presentations for kids. They'd love to see one, and they appreciate the props, the bird calls, and the photos. And so, just for everyone today, thanks for all that extra effort and for the great presentation today. And we appreciate your time. And again, hopefully all of our participants can join us again next week for some more webinars and some great information, and go online and check out those resources, and they can find out even more things about birds. So thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you, and thank you, Julie. Thank you, Mike. It was such a pleasure and such a privilege to be a part of Tree School. I really appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Everyone have a good evening, and we'll hope to see you next Tuesday.
Bye, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.